Hello and a warm welcome to the Federal. I'm Neelu Vyas. Supreme Court on Friday refused to accept the sealed cover which the centre submitted to the Supreme Court, which had the names of the panel members and the domain experts which were to investigate the irregularities highlighted by the Hindenburg report. Supreme Court said that it will form its own committee headed by a retired judge to restore confidence and transparency. Supreme Court now will take its own time to decide on the names, but the million-dollar question is, can there be a fair probe? And if the new committee is formed, what will be the mandate of its committee? Can it probe all aspects of the Hindenburg row? I'm joined by veteran Supreme Court lawyer and who's also the counsel for one of the petitioners, Mr. Prashant Bhushan. So thank you so much for joining the Federal. So my first question is that Supreme Court has discontinued the practice of taking the sealed covers and to accepting the sealed covers. Do you think that this is some kind of path-breaking moment? Because for years we've seen that, the government has indulged in giving sealed covers, and time and again there was a talk of discouraging this sealed cover jurisprudence. So in that ways, do you see this as some kind of a positive move?
Yes, it is certainly a positive move, and I hope that they lay down in so many words in one of their orders or judgments that this whole sealed cover process is violative of the principles of natural justice, and information submitted in sealed covers should not be accepted unless it is shared with the other party, because unless the other party has an opportunity to respond to what is being shared with the court, principles of natural justice are violated. I don't know why the Supreme Court took so long in understanding this. It seemed that for a long time it was suiting the court to just accept whatever information the government wanted to give it in a sealed cover, because it also helps the court to avoid its own accountability. But I think this is a positive step that they refuse to accept the sealed cover in this Adani Hindenburg case.
So the court had been insisting on transparency and confidence of the people. So the court could also have disclosed the names which were given by the center. Could it not have done that?
Yes, it did do that because it asked the government to share the whatever was given in the sealed cover to with us. I don't know whether there was anything else given by the government in a sealed cover other than this note, which proposed the terms of reference and which mentioned a committee with some names left blank, the name of a judge left blank, and two names given by designation, that is the Director ED as well as the Home Secretary. Other than that, I don't know whether any other names were given by the government to the court in a sealed cover, because that was not disclosed.
But we do not know how much time the court would take to come up with the names which the court has thought. But sir, the question is that what is going to be the mandate of this committee? Will it really investigate all aspects of the Hindenburg row? Say, for example, whether the short selling should be permitted or not. Is the regulatory regime really prepared to handle a short selling moment like this, the one which we saw, where the investors lost so many crores of money? So will it really investigate into all these aspects?
No, the short selling is not the real issue in my view. The short selling was not even done in the Indian stock exchange. The short selling of Hindenburg was done in their bonds, which were overseas. So that had nothing to do with it. The real issue is whether the facts which are disclosed in the Hindenburg report regarding the investment by Adani's shell companies in the tax havens into their own shares and thereby violating the rules, the SEBI rules, which permit a maximum of 75% ownership of the promoters group, which includes brothers, etc., of the promoters group. and whether that was violated by investing more than 75% through these Benami companies registered in tax havens, whether the SEBI failed in regulating this or investigating this, because several complaints had been made to SEBI about this, whether what is the source of funds of these Benami companies or shell companies registered in tax havens through which Adani invested more than 40,000 crores in shares of their own companies. What is the source of these funds? Whether these funds have been siphoned out of the Adani companies through over invoicing, etc. Whether the LIC failed to adhere to any, whether there are any prudential norms for investment by LIC in companies, whether the LIC failed to adhere to those prudential norms for investment in Adani companies, because they invested more than 30,000 crores of public money in Adani companies. Whether any further regulation is required for all this, whether the regulatory companies failed in their regulation, and what should be the accountability of these regulatory institutions like SEBI, etc., by failing to regulate all this, which is disclosed in the Hindenburg report. And so these are the real issues, and whether banks, Indian banks, should be allowed to lend money to companies on the basis of pledging their own shares, because they first inflate the prices of their own shares and then say, well, we have shares worth 1 lakh crores, so give us loan of 1 lakh crores, and we are pledging these 1 lakh crores of shares which have been inflated by insider trading and by buying their own shares. The shares may be worth only 10 rupees, but they have been inflated to 1,000 rupees by this insider trading, etc. And on the basis of 1,000 rupees, they are borrowing from the banks. So whether this kind of borrowing on the basis of pledging of shares should be allowed or not. So these are the real issues which need to be investigated. Short selling is not the issue here, because short selling has taken place there in the bonds in the US or abroad, which the Indian authorities certainly cannot regulate, nor can the Indian courts regulate.
I'm saying that's exactly what my question was, that of course what you have listed out is a wide ambit, and can the committee which is going to be formed probe into all these aspects? There is a big question mark. And of course the second thing is that can the committee also prosecute the short seller like Nathan Anderson of Hindenburg and his associates in India and the US? That is also another aspect. So how is the committee really going to prioritize that? What is it going to do first? And that's where the mandate of the committee comes in, that how is it really going to decide that what are the moot points which is really going to look into?
Well, that depends on what the mandate the Supreme Court gives it. As I said, short selling has taken place in their bonds which are not in India. And therefore, that short selling is not an issue which the Indian authorities can do anything to regulate. So therefore, that's not really the business of any investigation in India. The business of the investigation in India is whether the facts stated in the Hindenburg report about Adani using shell companies registered in tax havens to buy their own shares and thereby boost their price, and whether taking of loans from banks on the basis of this boosted price, and the source of these funds which have been invested from by these shell companies, all these are the relevant issues. This is what the Hindenburg report discloses, and this amounts to a regulatory failure by the regulatory authorities in India. And the question which should be asked is, why have the regulators failed to regulate all this? If Adani was violating the rules by using shell companies to buy their own shares, why was this not stopped despite receiving complaints? Why did the regulators not act upon this? And why did LIC invest 30,000 crores of public money into these inflated shares of Adani? And why did Indian banks lend so much money, some 75,000 crores or so, to the Adani companies on the basis of pledging of their shares?
Right.
Some of these banks have had to have made margin calls, as a result of which Adani has had to prepay some of these loans, which were taken on the basis of pledge of their shares, because the share price fell and therefore the security became inadequate.
Right. You have been insisting on, that how this entire system has been likened to the Mundra scam, that the LIC, the way LIC has dealt with is almost similar to what we saw in the Mundra scam. And where there was so much of irregularity, and then how the bank had lent money. So, do you think that this is really something very, very similar? And are you hopeful that the committee will really look into it? And as you said in the beginning, that what is going to be the role of the public sector banks? Can they, invest so much, and can they give out loans like this? So all those are moot points. So are you hopeful that the committee can really look into these aspects where you have a precedent of a Mundra scam?
Well, I hope that the Supreme Court will direct the company to look into all this, because these are the real issues which have arisen on the basis of the Hindenburg expose. How did the LIC invest so much at these inflated prices of Adani shares? How did the banks give so much loans on the basis of inflated share security? That is, you are pledging shares, and by saying, look, my shares are worth 1,000 rupees when they may be only worth 10 rupees. You have inflated the price of your shares by insider trading, and then you say, look, my share price is worth 10,000 crores, therefore give me loan of 10,000 crores, I am pledging these shares, knowing full well that the share price has been inflated by insider trading. So why should the banks be allowed to lend money on the basis of pledge of shares, which may be inflated in price?
But so why I'm repeatedly raising these doubts is that during the course of the argument also on Friday, when this was mentioned that Adani share prices were, inflated artificially than their actual price. So the bench said that, we cannot start with an assumption that there was a regulatory failure. So if that is the basic assumption on which the committee will move forward, do you really think that it's objectives when the bench has very clearly said that we cannot start with an assumption where
No, I'm not saying you start with any assumption. I'm saying you ask the committee to examine whether there has been a regulatory failure.
Okay.
Whether the regulators like SEBI had information about this insider trading by Adani companies registered in tax havens, and why did they, if they had this information, why did they not act on it? And if they did not, then who is responsible for it? What should be the accountability of those persons?
Right.
Strictly speaking, that should be the remit of the committee. I mean, that should be one of the remits of the committee. Whether the allegations of insider trading through tax haven companies of Adani is true or not. Whether the regulators were aware of this or not. Whether they had complaints about this or not. Whether they investigated this or not. And if so, why did they not regulate it? If it is true, then why did they not regulate it? And then uh, where did this money come from? If 40,000-50,000 crores has been invested by shell companies of Adani, which are registered in tax havens, which do not do any business whatsoever, where did they get this money from? Has it come from over invoicing, which the DRI had alleged in a show cause notice which they had sent to these Adani companies in 2013, that you have over invoiced by 4 times, 5 times, and siphoned out the money to your companies based in tax havens? That was all in black and white by the DRI. So therefore, the source of these funds will substantiate the issue of siphoning out through over invoicing, etc., from the Adani companies.
But Mr. Bhushan, don't you think that there is a certain dichotomy in the stand which the government is taking? Now, say, for example, the Solicitor General, Tushar Mehta, says that, the government line of inquiry suggests the investigation into all aspects of Hindenburg report. But then at the same time, not in the last hearing, but in the previous hearing, he said that, the impression should not go out that, the regulator in our country needs a monitoring. Now, this is a certain dichotomy which is really suggested by the Solicitor General himself. On one hand, he says that there should be a complete investigation. On the other hand, he says that there should be a certain buffer for the or bodies like SEBI, because the impression to the outside investor should not go out that our country's regulator needs another monitoring. So, how would you really explain this dichotomy?
Well, the thing is that Hindenburg report gives out in black and white the complaints which were made to SEBI, the information that SEBI had, and why SEBI did not act on these allegations of insider trading. Why did they not stop this? Why? How could anybody not see that when the profit of a company is going up by only 21% in 3 years or 4 years, and yet the share price is increasing by 40 times over the same period? What is really happening? Why is the share price increasing 40 times when the profit is increasing only by 21%? So therefore, these are the issues which the committee needs to see. Why did the regulators not see this? This is obviously a clear indication of price rigging happening. Why did they not investigate this?
Okay. But Mr. Bhushan, when the new committee is formed, how do we see it how do we see the things unfolding? Are they going to summon the SEBI chief? Will they summon the ED officers, the CBI, the SFIO? How is it really going to happen? I mean, will we see that kind of a scenario where they are being summoned, where they are being questioned? Well, there'll be a lot of media leaks also happening as to what the media will report when the committee investigation is on, or is it everything will be under wraps? How do you see the things unfolding?
So first they should go through the Hindenburg report and ask questions on the basis of that Hindenburg report to Adani, firstly, and then to the regulators and the law enforcement authorities. Okay, look, this is prima facie the evidence which the Hindenburg report gives of shell companies being used to buy shares, defeat the regulation of 25% free floating shares in the market, because with all this insider trading, they had more than sometimes more than 87% shares of the company with themselves, with the
One
promoters.
clarification, sir. One clarification that most of these shell companies are offshore, I mean, outside India. So, can they investigate into those shell companies as well?
Well, they can certainly ask Adani as to whether these companies belong to. They can ask Mr. Vinod Adani. They can ask the other investigative agencies to examine. And this SIT or whatever, this committee can itself be armed with investigative powers by the Supreme Court. Just as the Supreme Court forms an SIT and arms it with investigation powers, this committee can also be armed with all powers of investigation. And therefore, they can ask this information from Mauritius in a letters rogatory, etc.
I was following the hearing on Friday when you did mention about the impeccable integrity of the judge who's going to be heading the committee, to which Solicitor General said that, no judge needs an integrity certificate. And he said a thing like that. But you raised a very valid point. Now, what would you really say? Because we do not know who the retired judge will be, how capable or how efficient will he be, whether at all Supreme Court will arm the committee with all the powers which you have just mentioned, that they can be armed with investigative powers. So everything is in a realm of question right now. So how do we really expect the things from here on?
Well, I think it's up to the Supreme Court. They need to find one or two or perhaps 3 judges of
Okay.
impeccable integrity. They should
Right.
certainly not have any of these government people or agencies which are known to be today completely under the control of the government agencies like ED or the Home Secretary, etc. In that committee. Of course, these agencies must provide whatever assistance the committee needs. But the committee must be a totally independent committee, completely independent of the government. The government has been known to be favoring Adani and shielding them, the government and these regulatory agencies. So certainly the committee should not have any people from either the government or from these regulatory agencies, but completely independent.
Right. But Mr. Bhushan, what is really going to be the aim of the end goal of the committee? That first it will investigate into the irregularities of the Hindenburg report, and then probably is it going to suggest some kind of an improvement in the statutory and the regulatory regime?
Yeah, that's right. First, it should investigate into the veracity of the Hindenburg report, uh, all the allegations made in that Hindenburg report. And then, of course, also examine as to why the LIC invested so much money. Then also examine as to whether banks can advance loans on the basis of pledged shares of those very companies.
Right.
All these things need to be examined by the committee.
But time and again, people have been raising questions about the proximity of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Mr. Adani. So, one last question which I would want to ask you is that do you really think that the reality will really come out through this committee, or it will just be another cover up kind of an exercise which will deal into few aspects and not the larger aspects or the serious ones which need to be addressed?
Well, the nature of the committee and the terms of reference of the committee will reveal as to whether it's a serious exercise or whether it will appear to be a cover-up exercise. Let's see.
And Mr. Bhushan, how much time would you think that the court will take to decide on the names of the retired judge and the domain experts? Any idea on?
I can't say. I think they should do it fairly soon.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Wonderful talking to you. And one appeal to the viewers who are watching this interview, share it as widely as you can and stay tuned to the Federal. Thank you.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more interesting updates.